Hello to all the Rosies and Homefront Joes, and welcome back to On the Victory Homefront. This week's episode is a very special episode because we are going to pay homage to one of the most iconic people of the World War II Homefront, and that is Rosie the Riveter. Yes, because March 21st every year is Rosie the Riveter Day. So today we are going to be talking all things Rosie the Riveter, who she was, what she stood for, and the important role that she played during World War II. So during World War II, the war wasn't just fought overseas. It was fought in factories, in shipyards, in offices, and on farms across America. It was fought on the home front, and at the center of that effort was a figure we've all come to know, Rosie the Riveter. But Rosie wasn't just one woman. She was millions. Before World War II, women were already part of the workforce. I think that's something that we do tend to forget. But opportunities for women in the workforce were limited. Now, by the early 1950s, it was nearly 27% of American women who held jobs. That's roughly about 12 million women. But they were mostly in domestic service, teaching, clerical work, and textiles. And married women working outside the home was very discouraged. So the war didn't exactly introduce women to work, but it changed where they could work and what they were allowed to do. As the U.S. entered the war, over 16 million men left for military service, and suddenly the country faced a problem. Who would do the work? By the end of the war, nearly 19 million women were in the workforce. So that's more than 6 million had entered during the war years alone. And the doors didn't just open, they were pushed open. When we picture Rosie the Riveter, we often picture one job. But Rosie wasn't just one job. She was thousands. In industrial and factory work, she was riveters, welders, machinists, operators, drill press operators, tool and die makers, aircraft assemblers, engine mechanics, sheet metal workers, ship fitters, electricians, painters, inspectors and quality control workers, ammunition handlers, ordnance workers, steel and foundry workers. And they weren't just assisting, they were building the tools of war. Then we have the roles in transportation and infrastructure: bus drivers, taxi drivers, streetcar operators, railroad workers, freight handlers, truck drivers, delivery drivers, warehouse workers, dock workers. Then we have women entering military, which a lot of them were, of course, here at home. And you're talking the WACs, the WAVEs, the WASP, the SPARs, the Marines. They were clerks, typists, radio operators. They were cryptographers, mechanics, drivers, pilots ferrying aircrafts, weather observers, radar operators, and intelligence staff. In clerical and administrative roles, there were secretaries, typists, stenographers, bookkeepers, filing clerks, payroll clerks, receptionists, switchboard operators, telegraph operators, postal workers. Then you have specialized roles of cartographers, drafting assistants, technical illustrators, statistical clerks, procedure and inventory staff. The war wasn't just fought with weapons, it was fought with information, organization, and precision. And we cannot forget an area that is often looked over here in the U.S., and that is in agriculture that women entered the workforce in. We're talking farm laborers, equipment operators, dairy workers. There was the Women's Land Army that was here in the U.S. as well. We saw an influx in nurses, and they were allowed to be ambulance drivers, medical technicians, laboratory workers, chemists, engineering assistants. So when we say Rosie the Riveter, we're talking about millions doing whatever the country needed when duty called home. So why were women specifically called? Well, we touched on that a little bit, because World War II was not just a battlefield war, it was a production war. It was planes, ships, and tanks and ammunition that was needed for the war effort. Victory depended on this output, and so the government turned to women, not quietly, but deliberately. Posters appeared, advertisements spread, and the message was clear. This is your duty. This is your moment, and this is where Rosie was born. The symbol of Rosie, "We Can Do It," was on magazine covers. There was a song, Rosie the Riveter. And there are actually two Rosies worth mentioning. The "We Can Do It" poster by J. Howard Miller. It was not originally famous during the war. It later became iconic. But there was also Norman Rockwell's Rosie, which was featured on the Saturday Evening Post. It was more widely seen during World War II. And then the song Rosie the Riveter came out in 1942, and that helped spread the name. And what Rosie represented was strength, patriotism, and temporary empowerment. She wasn't a person, she was an idea, strong, capable, and determined, but also carefully presented as temporary. And we'll return to that later. But stepping into the workforce, it wasn't simple. For millions of women, especially mothers, it meant solving a new problem. Who takes care of everything else? Well, the government actually began funding centers under the Lanham Act. And that was for long hours for factory shifts, and it provided meals, education, and supervision. For the first time, the government helped care for working mothers' children. And then there was housing. Women's dormitories popped up, boarding houses popped up. It was usually shared housing near war industries because many women lived independently for the first time, close to the jobs that needed them. There was also workplace and transportation, factory cafeterias. They expanded transit systems and they adjusted work schedules. The country adapted because it had to. For years, women helped carry the nation. We became a very strong part of the backbone during the World War II years here in America. But then the war ended. The soldiers returned home and the country began to shift again. Jobs started to return to servicemen. Women were laid off or encouraged to leave. The messaging shifted back to home life. It wasn't framed as loss, it was framed as a return to what life was before the war. And some women welcomed it. Others had discovered something new: independence, skill, purpose. There was no single moment marking the end. It was just a gradual change. But what the women had done did not disappear. They built the planes, they built the ships, they kept the country running. They made victory possible. Without protest, without recognition, proved they could do the work, all of it. And for many years after the war, their contributions were remembered quietly. But in time, recognition came. Stories preserved, history revisited, and in 2022, the Congressional Gold Medal was awarded to the Rosies, a long overdue honor. In 1942, women were asked to serve, and they did. Without hesitation, without expectation, Rosie the Riveter wasn't just a symbol of the past, she was a promise of what ordinary people can do when duty calls home. I thank you for joining me for this very special episode of On the Victory Homefront. And until next time, remember, my friends, victory is in the everyday.